Welcome to the Art Conservation Center. My name is Bill Brown, and I'm the Chief Conservator here at the Center. Today I'd like to talk about our program at the Center, show you what we're up to, and introduce you to the staff who are working on some really interesting projects I'm sure you'll want to see. After our presentation, you'll have the opportunity to ask the Conservator questions. First and foremost, we are responsible for the care of the Art Museum's diverse collection of paintings, sculpture, textiles, works of art on paper. These range from ancient to modern times. To meet this challenge, we're fortunate to have 3 highly trained conservators, a really versatile conservation assistant, and to make it all work, our office manager. The conservation magic takes place here in a 3,000 square foot studio, which was built in the 1980s. If you pan around the room, you can see that we have these drop-down trunks that you see for fume exhaust. We have a fire suppression system, the halon fire suppression system, X-ray, other equipment, also including some really nice microscopes, and just generally the high-tech equipment that's required to treat art in the 21st century. Looking around, there's a variety of art work on tables which reflect the diversity of the work that we do here. You can see the African objects behind me here, which are being prepared for exhibition. You can also see around me all of these wonderful Italian Renaissance paintings, which are here for technical analysis. In 2012, we established an interdisciplinary collaboration with the Duke University Chemistry Department and their sister department at the University of Pisa in Italy. We call this the Art Plus Science Initiative. We will have 4 conservation scientists here beginning tomorrow and next week. 3 are coming from Italy and 1 from the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. They'll be here to examine the paintings with different analytic equipment to help identify the painting materials used by these Renaissance artists. I just want to say that education is central to the mission of the Art Museum and the Art Conservation Center. We consult with curators and conservators around the state and help organize practical workshops to help small museum professionals better care for their collections. We also have come up with a series of small exhibitions which will focus on the practice of conservation and the impact of conservation science on art history scholarship. Noel Khan, our conservator of paintings, has curated the first focus show, which will open soon, titled Actual State. You'll be meeting Noel shortly. She's actually seated right over here. First, I'd like to introduce you to Perry Hurt. He is our associate conservator of paintings. He's working on a project that's really a poster child for the Art Plus Science Initiative, and which will be the subject of the second focus exhibition in the fall. Here you go, Perry.
Thank you very much, Bill. Hello to everybody out there. I'm going to be talking about the conservation treatment of these 2 paintings. But first, to give you a little bit of background, these are 2 of 9 early British portraits in the collection. They've been in the collection since the 1950s and 1960s, but most of them have rarely, if ever, been on view. These are 2 of the more important ones. The research project that we're doing is called the Scott Project. We've been working on it for about 5 years. This is a project to research the paintings as well as do full conservation treatments, if possible, on all the paintings. And if that interests you, we're going to have all these paintings on view later this year in the fall to show the research that we've done, as well as give people a chance to see the paintings in the flesh. Now, these 2 paintings in particular are the best of the lot as far as those 9 early British portraits go. These paintings are by Paul van Sommer. They're dated from about 1619, so they're about 400 years old. And they are of Lord and Lady Cavendish. Lord Cavendish later became the 2nd Earl of Devonshire. That may not mean a lot to people out there, but you may be familiar with the major tourist attraction in northern England called Chatsworth. And Chatsworth was the home of the Cavendish family and is still owned by the Cavendish family. Now, what I'm doing here is a full conservation treatment of the paintings. This is a very in-depth process. We'll be talking about that a little bit more later with Noel Ocon. But the process that I'm in now is removing all the materials that are not original to the painting. So just a little bit of an idea, if you have a 400-year-old painting, chances are it's been restored several times before it gets to me. So in fact, on these paintings, we have 3 layers of restoration. Each round of restoration generally includes maybe a little bit of cleaning, but generally more varnish, and then restoration paint. If there were damages, then the restorer is going to cover up the damages with their own paint. And over time, all these layers of restoration slowly but surely degrade. They become yellow, darken, the restoration paint changes color. So ultimately, after 400 years, you may think you're seeing the paintings that, the way they were originally painted, but actually they've changed quite a bit. And all of those materials obscure the details of the original artist. The paintings, just like all artwork, are really, in a sense, time capsules. They capture what the artist was doing at the time, what culture was at the time, even religion, economics, all sorts of things are captured in an artwork. And so by doing this kind of restoration where we uncover the original as much as possible, we're getting back that evidence of the time. So let's take a little bit closer at the painting itself and see the process that I'm doing. So if you look closely at the corner right over here, I've cleaned most of the painting, and in this area right here you see a discolored yellow area. This is what the whole painting was covered with originally, and I've left this patch just for this kind of a explanation. You can see how dark and discolored that is. And there's actually a lot of artists retouching in there as well. If we come down to this area down here, you see also very discolored, correct? But you also see where I've removed it right here. The restoration long ago moved the edge of the sleeve out here when it's actually right here. The restorer misconstrued this line coming down, which is actually a cape behind the figure. So the restorer ran it all together, and of course that's totally different from what the original artist expected us to see. So in cleaning a painting, we basically take the layers down one by one, going from the newest layers to the oldest layers. This yellow area here came off fairly simply with mild solvents. Get that layer off, then we work on the next layer. The next layer is a little older, takes a little bit more complex, stronger solvents. We get that layer off. But unfortunately, we get to very early restoration, which is directly on the surface of the painting. Now that early restoration was done with oil paint, which today is a no-no. You'll hear more about that later. But that very early restoration oil paint is very hard, stuck right to the surface. And ordinarily, in the past, that's the kind of restoration that we would not be able to remove because, of course, we don't want to damage the original painting underneath. So we have to be very careful. In many cases, restorers would have left that right in place. But we're very fortunate in that right down the road at Duke University, a professor there named Adele de Cruz just recently invented a laser, the very first laser used for painting conservation. With that laser, I can remove the majority of this very early overpaint and expose the original painting underneath. And you can see that work right here. I've been working in the background right here for about the last week and a half. That's how long it's taken me just to clean this one old restoration layer from this area right here. And in fact, you can see the border right here. This is all restoration overpaint, completely covering the background, and this is the exposed original. Now this looks quite odd. And that looks odd because there's no varnish on that. I will put my own varnish on it. You can see the transition here. This and this are exactly the same, except this has my new varnish on top of it. So you can see the difference here. When I finish the painting, all of this will look beautiful, of course, because we do very good work here. But the other thing that's very interesting about the cleaning, as I said before, it reveals the details, the nuances of the original artist, the technique, the quality of the painting. And we see a lot of lovely details that have been uncovered here, the nice little gold points, the fabric, the very rich fabric here. But there are details that come out that we don't expect whatsoever. One of the best one was right up here on Lady Cavendish. You see this great blue feather in her hair here, right behind the tiara. As you can see, there's a great deal of damage up here. In a very early restoration, the restorer painted the feather out altogether as he was also painting out the damages in the background. So as we're cleaning, we discover this lovely feather. And that's just one of the many instances that we see when we're doing this kind of work. So what would the next step be? The next step in the restoration process would be, for me, once I've cleaned the painting, I've gone as far as I can, I put fresh varnish on it, it's looking lovely, but all the damages show up, the scratches, the paint losses, all that sort of thing. Well, that's the stage where I would put my own paint on there to cover up those damages, to camouflage them so they wouldn't distract you. So for more on that information, I'm going to turn you over to curator Dennis Weller and conservator Noel Ocon.
Thank you, Perry. Pleasure to be here. I am the odd person out here in that I'm a art historian rather than conservator. So in my mind, I look for a larger context to the paintings that they're treating here in the lab, and I spend a lot of time here working with conservators in kind of showing what can be done and what needs to be done on the paintings, because as a curator, I'm in charge of a collection. Now, we are very lucky in that the North Carolina Museum of Art has one of the premier collections of old master paintings, certainly in the Southeast, if not major part of the United States, in that when this museum was founded from a state appropriation in 1947, they took the $1 million and bought primarily old master paintings. And because we would eventually get the major cache of paintings from the Crest collection, which were mostly Italian, a lot of that $1 million went towards Northern European paintings, both Northern Renaissance and Northern Baroque, the 17th and into the 18th century. So in my position here, I am the curator of Northern European art from in the Old Master area. And as such, I have followed an approach to being a curator that is in keeping with the English tradition. I see myself as a keeper of a collection. And as a keeper, I'm involved in the interpretation of works of art, doing research on them, bringing to the conservation department thoughts on what I would like to see cleaned, and eventually doing catalogs and exhibitions that incorporate these wonderful paintings. So in doing that, it's always wonderful to be able to work directly with the conservator on a project that, in this case, actual state will result in bringing the public face-to-face with this conservation project. Now, in my role, I am able to talk to the public in terms of, well, how do we display works of art? That's one of my major roles here. How do they look in the galleries? We want them clean, we want them well framed. And when we talk about the actual state paintings that we will in a moment, I guess it begins with how they look on the wall. And the first thing might be to look at a frame. This is the frame for one of the two paintings. We have a pair of frames that are similar, as are the paintings. And framing is very important. Now, there's a framing history as well as a painting art history. And frames tend to reflect the decorative taste of the time. Now, in the 16th century, when these paintings were executed, frame styles in Northern Europe were rather simple. This is a cassata type of frame. It doesn't have a lot of carved elements that you would see in French frames to follow, the large corners, the gilding. It's simple, but it matches the art that will be seen within that frame. Frames are also for protection. You don't want to have these very fragile paintings exposed in ways that might cause them damage. So a frame is exactly for protection. Now, when we talk about the two paintings in question here, we're talking about two works that came into the collection as part of the initial purchase from that $1 million in 1947. Actually, the museum did not open its doors until 1956, so in the intervening 9 years, we were able to identify and purchase major works of art. These two paintings are from the workshop of a man named Bernard Van Orley. And Van Orley was a Northern Renaissance painter who was active in Brussels primarily. He was a court painter. He had a large workshop, and we believe that these two works, the Pentecost and the Ascension, are from Van Orley's workshop. They have been identified as the Master of St. Michael, who seems to have worked in that workshop, or these two panels that have even been called by the Master of the Raleigh panels. But art historically, one first looks at, well, what is the subject matter here? You have the Pentecost and you have the Ascension. And here you see Christ after 40 days after the resurrection rising into the heavens, and this is taking place on the Mount of Olives with all the disciples around him, and included is the Virgin Mary. Now, she is not included in the description of this event in Acts, the book of Acts, the Apostle Acts, but she is here, I think, representative as the foundation of the church. So that is one of the two stories here. Noelle will talk about this a little bit more, but she always loves the floating feet here. The other work we see also from Acts is when the dove of the Holy Spirit came down, and here you have the disciples and the Virgin Mary again, and the dove of the Holy Spirit is extending tongues, because these disciples will then be able to speak in the many languages of the world and able to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. So you see this in this particular. Now, what you've probably noticed in looking, that one looks really nice and clean, and the other one, not so much. The other one is in its actual state, as Noelle will tell you. So I think what we want to do now is turn to Noelle Ocon, who is conservator of paintings, and she'll talk about her exhibition and the process of what she's doing here. And then we'll even take a look at the back of these panels in just a little bit.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm going to try to do this as smoothly as possible. Not so smooth. Hi, my name is Noelle. I'm the conservator of paintings here. And first I'm going to give a little introduction to what conservation is, okay? Conservation is an umbrella term for examination, preservation, documentation, and then restoration. So restoration is the fun, exciting, sexy part of it, but to get to that point, you have to do a lot of stuff first. That involves writing reports, examining paintings, looking at them under a microscope, X-radiography, infrared reflectography. We try to use the whole gamut of the electromagnetic spectrum, from gamma up to infrared. So that is why we call it conservation and not just restoration, okay? And the history of conservation is relatively recent. Until the 1950s, it was really considered a craft and not a science. And Helmut Ruhlmann, who is a conservator at the National Gallery of London, really started this modern take of conservation as both art and science. And so that's really when we started becoming conservators. And then the conservation training programs started creating conservators in the late 60s, early 70s. So what am I doing here? This is what I'm doing here. Okay, so the first thing we do when we work on a painting is clean it. And we can use traditional solvents, we can use the laser, whatever. And then we get into the process of retouching. Retouching is also called inpainting, it's also called compensation for loss. There's lots of terms. But what it is that we do is we're filling in where the paint has fallen off. So if you had hung on the wall for 400 years, you'd be pretty messed up too. So what we're trying to do is reduce that damage, okay? So that is, this painting has been completed. I have retouched all of the damages out, or as much as I could. But what do we have here? This is the actual state. This is what the painting really looks like without varnish and without retouching. And it can be pretty scary. However, we would consider this not in very bad condition. We've certainly seen paintings in worse condition. But you see here, there's various abrasions to the paint layer, other damages. These are splits in the panel, okay? Here's other splits. So what I'm going to do is touch in where the paint has fallen off, okay? And what materials do I use for that? Okay, well, let me show you my very nice and clean taboret, my fancy palette, a piece of Mylar on a piece of foam core. And then I have my iPad, which I don't use for inpainting. So, and my pigments. So what do we use? We use dry pigments. We can also use paint made specially for restorers, okay? So Perry mentioned that we don't use oil paint. So the reason why is because we want our inpainting material to always be soluble and to be reversible easily. So the oil paint, if I used oil paint, it would harden as much as the original. And we don't want that, and that's why Perry is having to use the laser. So we use a resin-based material, and it's funny because you can undo 9 months worth of work of retouching in minutes, and we've had to do that before. So why do I use a mixture of the two paints? This is a dry pigment, okay? That's rose madder. And I would mix that with resin. So I use a combination of these materials because I can't always match the pigment with this conservation paint. So why is that? Because a lot of times in these conservation paints, they have used modern pigments to try to imitate the traditional colors. So for example, if I use the vermilion in this paint, it's not going to match the real vermilion. And I'm going to slowly walk over here to show you the vermilion in the painting. All right? So I cannot imitate that using a synthetic. So I use the real stuff. Okay, so this is the vermilion paint. And so we use this combination. And so sometimes you can use the traditional paint, and sometimes you don't or you can't. So for example, for ultramarine, which is more valuable than gold even today, and especially back then, we actually use synthetic ultramarine because it would just be too cost prohibitive to use ultramarine, the real stuff. And also we replace, let's say, lead white with titanium white, and that's for the conservator safety. So, but the vermilion is mercuric sulfide, and it's the real stuff. But I also, I throw health and safety out the window with this because I need this paint. So that's how we retouch. We like to use little brushes. All right, it's a little brush. So, so that's where I will do the retouching. Okay. So let me talk about the actual state exhibition. Okay. So people always want to watch us work. And I don't know who likes people to watch them work, but I say, it's not figuratively, but it's literally watching paint dry. But I came up with this idea and bounced it off of Dennis last year that I would, in paint, retouch, compensate this painting in the galleries. So you can come and watch, and the schedule is on the website of when I'll be retouching in the galleries. I'll have my tabaret out there, and I'm going to work from left to right. There's other aspects to the exhibition. The Ascension will be out there, and the Ascension will also have some interesting photographs with it. So what is it going to have? It's going to have the photo of the actual state, and it will also have a photo that is ultraviolet visible light. And what that does is it will show everywhere I have put paint, okay? So why do we do that? Well, one of the most important reasons we do that is going back to the documentation aspect of conservation, where we want to document everywhere I put paint. Now, this will raise a question of, let's say, the ethics of retouching, okay? How much is too much? And I use this example over here. If you see this book, it's badly damaged, and the edge of the book is almost gone. So in my process, I will, So in the process, I will be retouching that, but I don't know where the edge of the painting is. So hold on as I smoothly grab my iPad. And so that's where we will be touching it in. And now I've lost track, sorry. One moment, please, as I recover. All right. Okay, so here is the thing I don't want to show you. All right, so here is the infrared reflectogram. And what that does is it shows where the artist painted first. But you can see that that book is actually intact. Well, what you're seeing there is the restoration. And that's the problem, is that restorer probably doesn't know as much as he wouldn't have known what the book looked like anyway. So what happens if I retouch that book and you come look at that book and you say, that's a great looking book, but it's mostly me. So how do we deal with that? Well, we don't work in a vacuum. Well, I work with the other people in the conservation lab and also directly with the curator. So we will discuss how we will touch that in. And so this is not the best example of when we talk about having to recreate something. And some of the paintings next door, there are whole figures that we have recreated. Bill Brown worked on a painting where a whole figure is missing, but we knew exactly what that figure looked like because the artist did 2 versions. So it goes back and forth. And this is why retreatability is so important. Let's say I inpaint that book, and then one day an etching comes to light that shows someone etched it closer to when it was painted and it was still intact. Then I could actually undo my work in minutes and try to put it back more appropriately. I mean, and why we do so much retouching is, there's a fineness to paintings that this would be very disturbing to look at in the galleries, versus, let's say, an old pot that's cracked, a glass thing that's cracked, it's an old pot, of course it's going to break. So people are more forgiving in certain areas certain museum goers would be more forgiving of a level of restoration that's not quite as far as we would do, okay? And also, we document everything, like I said before. So, it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process. Let's see what I was going to talk about. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the examination part. So we're going to go back to before I started, okay? Because remember I mentioned that we write reports. All right, so I'm going to turn this painting around. So doesn't that look weird? Well, so why does it look weird? Well, it's not weird to me, but the painting is on oak. It is on 4 planks of oak that have been glued together. Then in the 19th century and in the early 20th century, there is this movement that where they actually wanted the painting to be flat. But wood is going to move. And any of you are familiar with an old chair that's wiggled loose or anything like that, you know that wood expands and contracts. So this is an attempt that turned out to be misguided to try to prevent the painting from warping. Because what happens is it's going to move. It wants to move, but this is holding it. And so it will crack anywhere it can. So you'll actually get cracks in these areas. And this is called a cradle, by the way. So you'll get cracks in these areas. We actually bought a painting in the late 90s that when I unframed it, it cracked in half because they had been screwed in so tightly to the frame it couldn't move. So the minute the pressure was released, it cracked. There would be other parts of Actual State where there'd be a slideshow of some other treatments I've done as well. And so in the examination process, we also had dendrochronology done on this, okay? So dendrochronology is tree ring dating, and we have done, there's been many years of records of the tree ring patterns from Baltic oak. So we had a specialist come out here from the University of Arizona, Tomasz Woźny, and he counted all the rings and put them in a database, and it turns out the 4 planks are from the same tree and that the painting could not have been painted before 1518. And so that actually puts it well into the realm of the workshop of Bernard van Orley. And if you thought watching paint dry was boring, watching someone count tree rings is even more so. In fact, when I was helping him, I fell asleep because there's over 200 rings per plank, and he measures them in millimeters. And so basically a droning noise of numbers. So when he came back, we hired someone younger than me so they could stay awake and help him. And so the other part of restoration, examination documentation, is looking at the underdrawing. And we showed you the underdrawing earlier, but I didn't really explain what it was. So this is an underdrawing. And that is using infrared reflectography, okay? And infrared imaging was actually sort of started being used in the Cold War. It's Cold War technology, it's heat seeking, it's predator vision, it's all those things, but we use it for good, not for evil. And what it does is it shows where the artist drew before he painted, okay? So then there's a close-up. And what's interesting is that there's different underdrawing media in this painting. There's a wet medium and a dry medium. And so perhaps it could show that it was a composition that was transferred from another composition, and then the master may have gone in on his own and sort of beefed up the things he wanted to beef up. But this guy's got just a humongous foot. And I'll show you the infrared for the Ascension, or for the Pentecost. Sorry. So there's the infrared for that one. All right. So like I said, this is the huge, long process of what we do before we even start treating the painting. Okay. Let's see. So that might be about it. I hope you come to see the actual state exhibition, and there will be things to see when I'm not there as well. So, and I'll put out my tip jar, and we'll have a great old time, and we'll all watch paint dry. Thank you. So I think we're going to take some questions from the interwebs as I turn around my painting.
Thank you, Noel. That
You're
was great.
welcome.
We're now going to take questions. I think to get things started, I'll answer a question that's asked a lot, which is how do you become a conservator? If you're interested in art, if you're interested in science, interested in history, then maybe art conservation is the place for you. That's what I like about it, is that it combines all those disciplines. I got into art conservation by first graduating from an undergraduate program in art and art history, and then I went on to a graduate program in conservation. The program I went to was in Buffalo State College. Noel also attended the same graduate program. Perry took a slightly different route. He attended undergraduate conservation program at Virginia Commonwealth University in Virginia, and then spent time as an apprentice. Let's see, what questions do we have? I'm sorry. If you want to know more about how to become a conservator, please check out the website for the American Institute for Conservation. That is our professional organization. It's a great website, and it will direct you specifically to the different conservation programs and give you a lot more information on conservation in general.
And finding a conservator. If you have a treasure at home you would like fixed.
Yes.
Now, Faye had
Okay, we have a question from Elizabeth. How do you decide which paintings get worked on? Do you want to answer that, since you two were...
I'll just hold.
Yeah.
Well, as a curator of a collection, as I mentioned before, there are paintings that, in my mind, need treatment for various reasons. One that just might be an aesthetic reason, that the discolored varnish or sunken varnish or discolored paint will just require it to come into the lab and to have a treatment. As often, however, we have paintings that I want to bring in for treatment to help me in my research on the painting. Because one of my goals here is to do systematic catalogs of the collection. That means the full write-up from who owned it and when, conservation reports, relationship to other artists. So in these systematic catalogs, we will bring works of art in, we'll have them cleaned, and I'll learn a lot about them. Noelle's already pointed out underdrawings. Underdrawings tell me as much about an artist's technique as the finished painting. Then the dendrochronology helps me date works, so I know that these two works here could be from the period in which Bernard van Orley was active in Brussels. So certainly there is the aesthetic and there is the scholarly approach to why we bring things in. And then there's just, not that accidents happen, but if paint starts falling off a work, then it's time to bring it in and have it cleaned. Thank you.
And I'll just say that if you, for anybody out there who has a painting in their collection at home that might have belonged to their grandparents, they inherited it, and you think it looks dirty or you want to check it out, then again, please go to the AIC website. You can find a conservator, and he or she will be happy to assess its condition for you. We have another question from Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth. Why does the end paint need to be reversible? I think that's a Noelle question.
Well, I touched on that a little bit before. So the reason why we want it to be reversible is we want everything we do to be reversible. Varnish, retouching, structural treatment. But also, what happens is that I am matching new paint to paint that's 400 years old, okay? Over time, my paint may become discolored. And that will start showing up. That's why so the paint doesn't always match, or it may not match in 100 years, it may not match. So we always want to be able to undo what we've done. And I think that's the most important thing, though, is to know that, these paintings have been restored many times before. And I mean, it'd be nice to think that this is the last time they'll be restored, but in 100 years, we won't know. The next people will do it. So I hope that answers the question.
If you're out there, please don't feel shy about asking us questions. Anything that comes to your mind. There's another question that comes up a lot, which is how long does it take to clean a painting from start to finish? And since Perry hasn't said anything, I'll pass that over to Perry.
Yes, my turn. There are a lot of variables involved, obviously, how large the artwork is, how extensive the work that needs to be performed on it, all sorts of things. Maybe we'll do more research than normal on one painting than another. But ordinarily speaking, your average artwork takes anywhere from about a year to a year and a half to do a full conservation treatment on it. And maybe needless to say, there are very few of us here compared to the number of artworks that we have in the museum. So as a result, the full conservation treatment, we only do 1, 2, 3 of them a year, maybe 4 or 5 in the whole lab, to the extent that I was talking about before. Let's see, how long does it take? Oh, the other thing to mention is that this is, we're here full time, but the actual conservation work, like I was describing, is probably only about 20% of my job. We have a lot of other responsibilities in taking care of the collection. So this hands-on conservation treatment is just one facet of what we do.
We have a question from one of our colleagues, Paige Myers. She would like to know, how far does the laser penetrate into the restoration/paint layers? Another question for Perry.
The wonderful thing about the laser that Adele de Cruz developed for us for painting conservation in particular is that it penetrates very shallow, only in terms of 3 to 5 microns, which generally is maybe a half or a quarter of the depth of a paint layer. The paintings that I'm working on here that I was showing before, in most areas you have 3, 4, 5 paint layers. So if you're talking about a restoration paint layer on the top, obviously you don't want to go through that into the original paint. And the laser is very good about penetrating in very shallow level. The other thing I'll say about it is that it generates very little heat. There are a lot of different kind of lasers in the world. This one's very specific. It's an erbium YAG laser, and it generates very, very little heat. So that's not a problem.
Thank you, Perry. We have a question that's just come in from the Strickland Academy Homeschool. Which paintings do you like working on best? So I think maybe we can each field that question. Yeah. Noelle will go last. We all have preferences. I prefer Italian painting, although I do like Northern Italian painting as well. I really like working on old master paintings. I guess you could say that's my specialty. I also prefer working on panel paintings. I mean, paintings are painted on both panel and canvas. And I won't really go into detail as to why that is. I just like the way that the paint is applied. We all have backgrounds in art. We all have, personal favorites. We all have paintings we've worked on that are challenging. So it's kind of a complicated question, but Perry will be next to.
I think we all have a lot of varied experience with different types of paintings from different times, and they all represent different things. I like modern and contemporary artwork. In one way, it can be very difficult to work on. It presents different problems, and so sometimes that's interesting. My main experience is in 19th century American painting. I've done so much of it, I guess I'd have to say I'm a little bit bored with working on it. But of course, if another good one comes along, I'd be glad to do that. British painting, I'd worked on very little British painting up until 5 years ago, and now it's become one of my main interests just because I've spent so much time with it.
Hi. Well, everyone knows what I'm going to say. It ain't much if it ain't Dutch, but Dutch 17th century painting is my favorite. I will also go off course into Flanders, maybe Germany. I try to avoid all things Southern. But sometimes they do make me work on Italian and French paintings. But there's a good reason why, though. And the reason why is when I took my very first art history class as a sophomore in college, that it was low country art. And it's what I fell in love with even before I wanted to become a conservator. So I come by it honestly, I'd like to think. So.
And I'll say Venice is my favorite part of the world, and I love any art from Venice and glass. We have time for 2 more questions. We have a question here. What about the process is different if a painting is on wood versus canvas? Noelle, do you want to talk about that again?
Well, what's interesting is many people don't know that paintings were painted on anything but canvas, because that's really all you see now. But copper was common, wood panel, oak, poplar, lime wood. So there are a lot of different forms of support that artists use. Now, wood is a great support because it is stronger than the paint layer. It can handle the stress and strain paint, vector physics. I'm talking about vector physics, I will stop that. But anyway, so they both have different needs. They crack differently. Paint tends to flake off of canvas paintings differently than panel paintings. The panel paintings split, the canvas paintings tear. So a lot of it has to do with the materials you use, and retouching also is much less forgiving on panel paintings because of the texture. If you come look at our Italian or any of the panel paintings, you'll see how flat they are, and you get this jewel-like tone that is harder to get in a canvas painting. Is there anything else to add to that?
No, that's good. Here, okay, our last question comes from Catherine Height. What is the hardest medium to conserve? That's an excellent question, and I think that has something to do with contemporary art, so I'll have Perry answer that.
I'm going to answer it kind of roundabout and give a little bit of background in that we talked a lot about old master paintings today. Old master paintings are not easy to do conservation work on, but we have the luxury of building on many generations of other conservators that came before us. So they're established ways of working on things, and we modify them each generation to add something to that. So old master paintings become relatively straightforward for us to work on. I mentioned modern contemporary painting before. If you have something that was made yesterday, it becomes a lot harder to deal with because you don't have that background. You don't have other people having already discovered the tricks and the easy ways of doing things. So a lot of times you have a puzzle that's very hard to solve. The other thing that we really haven't mentioned, but really goes hand in hand with all conservation, is we don't want you to know that we worked on the piece. We want to be able to do it in a very light-handed way so that our work doesn't show. You can just appreciate the artwork for what it was, and you're not distracted by the signs or the things that show up from the restoration work. So For instance, you can have certain modern contemporary paintings that are very matte, very fragile surfaces. And there's almost no glue or way of repairing a tear or a hole that's not going to show up in some respect, just because of the materials that we're allowed to use. So that, for me, that would be probably the hardest thing to work on.
Let me add something to that real quick. So also, the thing about modern and contemporary materials is you don't have the strong guild system that they did in the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, where artists would be, apprentices and journeymen, and they learned how to paint properly. They learned about materials, and they learned about technique, and they learned from the master for many years, because they wanted to paint permanently. And there are treatises that go back to the 7th century about how to paint permanently. And Cennino Cennini in the 13th century also wrote a treatise on how to paint correctly, let's put it that way. But think about the kids these days, right? So we don't learn materials and techniques. It's not really taught in art schools. And also the immediacy. Leonardo painted something he thought would last hundreds of years. How many things are we creating that we think will be around in 100 years? So it's sort of the change in society, that has made, so modern and contemporary materials aren't necessarily made to last, and that makes them harder to work on. So.
Although I'll just make one last comment, which is that some old master painters actually experimented with their materials as well. And
Like
Leonardo da Vinci is a really good example. But overall, the general quality of old master paintings, I mean, it's even a painting like this, this is hundreds of years old, and it's survived remarkably intact. I want to thank everybody for these great questions. Say you've been a great audience, but I can't see you. But thanks anyhow. So I'd like to please ask you to come see Noel at work in the gallery during the actual state program, February 20th through July 10th. There's more information on conservation at the link that's shown. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to my colleagues Dennis Weller, Perry Hurd, and Noel Akan. I'm William Brown. This webcast is made possible through funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services and with the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources and the North Carolina Museum of Art. Thank you very much.